The advent of the fourth industrial revolution ushers in a new era of economic globalization, or what some refer to as globalization 4.0. In the context of shifting international dynamics, cooperation among nations requires innovative thinking and methods in order to advance national, regional and global interests. The Belt and Road Initiative, which China proposed as a new mode for international cooperation, incorporates diversity and inclusivity at its core. Over 120 countries and nearly 30 international organizations have officially endorsed the initiative by signing a memorandum of understanding with China, and those figures are expected to continue to climb. What can be done to further boost international support for the BRI? What role can the BRI play to strengthen multilateralism and international cooperation? Welcome to part one of this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, of an Ambassadorial Roundtable during the 5th China and Globalization Forum in Beijing, which was held recently in the Chinese capital. This roundtable is also part of a special series called BRI 360, presented to you by The Point team. For the very first episode, we'll hear from 5 ambassadors from the US, China and 3 European countries about the BRI-related challenges and opportunities for globalization. So it is my great honor to introduce them to you. They are His Excellency Edouard Boateng, Ambassador of Ghana to China; Giuseppe Fedele, Chief of Mission of the International Organization for Migration; Giuseppe Fedele, Minister Counselor and the Deputy Head of Mission of the Italian Embassy in Beijing; William Klein, Minister Counselor for Political Affairs of the US Embassy in Beijing; the Honorary Lan Lijun, Director General of the China Fund for International Studies and former Ambassador of China to Sweden, Canada and Indonesia; Honorary Terry Miller, Director of the Center for International Trade and Economics of the Heritage Foundation, former US Ambassador to the United Nations; His Excellency Eoin O'Leary, Ambassador of Ireland to China; His Excellency Miguel Angel Ramirez Ramos, Ambassador of Cuba to China; Johannes Regenbrecht, Minister and Deputy Head of Mission of the German Embassy to Beijing; and last but not least, Honorary Su Ge, Chairman of the China National Committee for Pacific Economic Cooperation and former Chinese Ambassador to Iceland and a CCG advisor. So a warmest round of applause to welcome all of them. And of course, the warmest round of applause to all the other guests and distinguished scholars and representatives from different walks of life to join us in this special session. So the topic, as I said, is BRI in the era of globalization, especially globalization 4.0. I would like to start with an opening statement, or rather a question to Ambassador Miller, if I may. I know you are not an ambassador anymore, but you are actively contributing your wisdom and expertise in terms of think tanks and coming up with ideas to help promote understanding between different countries. This very interesting statement made by US Secretary of State Pompeo most recently about the Belt and Road Initiative, where he talked about this initiative being a non-economic offer, where China practices predatory lending using below-market pricing, and it is not straight, and that it is a threat. Is this kind of judgment shared by other politicians, other decision makers, and major think tanks? What is your view on this, please?
The Belt and Road Initiative is undoubtedly one of the most important initiatives happening in the world right now. And we've been having a discussion already this morning about globalization and the ways that countries can increase their openness to each other and to the world economy. And there are really 2 different ways that this kind of opening takes place. The first is where we agree multilaterally or sometimes bilaterally on all the things that our governments will not do. This is basically the nature of the World Trade Organization and the other trade agreements that have been the main drivers of globalization are a series of agreements where governments voluntarily agree to restrain their own scope of activity. They won't put tariffs on, or they won't put tariffs on above a certain level, or they won't put quotas on trade, or they won't really interfere in commerce in a variety of ways. The Belt and Road Initiative, which is the topic of this panel, is a second stream of globalization that's more consistent. It certainly has some features of investment. That's the main thing it does. But it also has features consistent with the kinds of activities we've undertaken through the World Bank collectively in the past, or through aid agencies like our own in the United States, the U.S. Agency for International Development, and others in countries around the world. And this is an important opening by China to the world. It indicates a desire on the part of the Chinese government to engage more actively with countries around the world, and there's been a long process of increased Chinese engagement, and that's something I think that we all would welcome. But at the same time, it does challenge the status quo in many places, so I think that forms an occasion for friction sometimes. I just want to mention two in particular that I think, if addressed, would go a long way towards relieving concerns, including those expressed by my own Secretary of State, Mr. Pompeo, about the initiative. And the first would be transparency. I think normally when you have an investment relationship in the international economy, it's well understood what the goals are of both parties to that relationship. The investor is going in order to gain profit and a return on their investment. It's very transparent what they hope to receive. And the person or the country or whoever is receiving the investment, they have goals of their own. They want to increase employment. They want to increase their standard of living in their country. It's all very transparent, and we know what both sides want. With the Belt and Road Initiative, that's not always the case. It's not always entirely clear what the goals, to the rest of us at least, around the world, what the goals of the Chinese government are as they engage in these investment kinds of activities around the world. And the second thing is corruption. And I'm not talking particularly about corruption in China, but corruption in countries all over the world. And when we have government-to-government activities in particular, there's always the opportunity for corrupt behavior on the part of one or the other parties. And that can be a very severe problem in terms of undermining the ultimate effectiveness and sustainability of these investments that are taking place under the Belt and Road Initiative. And I think I'm going to stop there and hear the views of the rest of our panelists.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Miller. Very interesting points you have raised, especially some of the concerns such as transparency and corruption. I'm sure we'll be able to hear the Chinese views on this and the views of other participants on this, and maybe discuss on this topic as well. So let me move to our next speaker, who is seated right next to you, Ambassador O'Leary from Ireland. The latest I found on the internet about the opinion about Ireland on this initiative was actually the beginning of last year, where your Deputy Prime Minister, Simon Coveney, said that the BRI is another great opening of China towards the world, and that the Irish side is willing to take an active part in it as a strategic partner and make in-depth discussions on cooperation with China to jointly send the positive signal of supporting economic globalization, trade liberalization, investment facilitation, and opposing protectionism. And yet, Ireland is not on board yet. Why?
I think, thank you very much to the CCG for their invitation here today. I think when you say we're not on board, is we haven't signed a memorandum of understanding. But we would see the Belt and Road as a broader commitment to multilateralism. I think Ireland and China now have diplomatic relations. This is the 40th anniversary of our diplomatic relations. And both of us at that time were opening up to the world. It was the first year of China's opening up, and Ireland had been a member of the European Union for 6 years at that stage. And Ireland and China have built their prosperity on the basis of opening up the world system, opening up their own systems to a multilateral, competitive and open system. So in that context, Ireland sees the Belt and Road as a very important building block in building a global approach built on multilateral rules. We are interested, for instance, in exploring how we can foster synergies between our approach for rules-based connectivity as set out in the EU-Asia connectivity strategy and in the Belt and Road initiative. And along with our European Union partners, we have pledged to coordinate with China to improve the economic, social, fiscal, financial and environmental sustainability of Europe-Asia connectivity. We had a very good summit last week between the European Union and China, and after very long and detailed discussions, we reached very clear commitments on trade liberalisation, including a pledge to conclude an ambitious EU-China Comprehensive Investment Agreement in 2020. And we have committed to work together at the World Trade Organization to maintain this rules-based multilateral trading system with the WTO at its core and to fight against unilateralism and protectionism. And what this, of course, involves strengthening an international rules-based approach to the broad range of trade-related issues, not just tariffs, but also the issue of subsidies, the issues of non-tariff barriers. Within the European Union, we had to fight for decades to create a single market. Even though we had no tariffs from 1958, we only managed to create the single market in 1992. And my colleague here beside me and all the other EU colleagues will remember that that was a hard-fought battle, because you can say that lawnmowers have no tariff, but then you can create a standard that effectively means only an Irish or a German lawnmower can be sold in your market. So what we see the Belt and Road as is a contribution to a global effort to create a level playing field where we can all get prosperous together. And I'd like to share Terry Miller's very good points about the need for transparency in that regard.
Thank you very much, Ambassador O'Leary. So, global level playing field for all parties and how to strengthen multilateralism. Again, this is also a very important hotspot in the entire discussion about the Belt and Road. And Ambassador O'Leary was constantly looking his colleague to the right, which is the representative from the German embassy, which is, of course, very natural as you want to act in one. However, just last month, we have one country in Europe which kind of acted not in sync with the other European countries, which was Italy. It was considered to be the star of the month, or star in quotation marks for some people. So I'm going to ask our representative from the Italian embassy, Mr. Fedele, to speak on behalf of the Italian side. Finally, Italy is on board. Why did it take so long, and where are you going from now?
Thank you, Madam Liu. I think the reason is simple. We needed to first reach a common understanding with our Chinese friends on a few issues concerning the Belt and Road Initiative. You know, last month, President Xi Jinping paid a state visit to Italy. And I think the main takeaways from the high-level discussions and meetings there, on which we agreed, were that the Belt and Road Initiative, this road should be two-way, and should be not only about goods, services, projects, infrastructure, but also knowledge, ideas, academic exchanges, so the so-called people-to-people dimension, which is very important to us, to our head of state, this idea of a new Silk Road of knowledge. At the same time, we believe the Belt and Road remains a connectivity initiative, while in this broader sense, including knowledge. So not a grand geopolitical vision. And we feel that on this we are on the same page with our Chinese friends. This point was made also several times during our discussions in the last few days, over the last few days and nights, on the outcomes of the next Belt and Road Forum. So we are building now our cooperation with China on the Belt and Road initiative on this fundamental understanding, as well as on another understanding. That is that our cooperation under the Belt and Road initiative will abide by our respective international obligations and will respect the existing multilateral frameworks. This is very important. And this includes, for Italy, of course, our membership of the EU. Ambassador O'Leary mentioned the importance of the EU dimension. And what does our membership of the EU implies? Implies the need to respect and to abide by some rules. Implies the need to respect the principles of transparency, of course, as mentioned by the Honorable Terry Miller, open procurement, level playing field, economic, financial, fiscal, social, environmental sustainability of all projects under the BRI, particularly those we may develop with China in third markets. And all these principles are enshrined in our bilateral memorandum of understanding that we signed last month. That raised, I would say, worldwide attention and debate. We heard some maybe preemptive comments made without having seen actually the text that is now public. It's on our government website. So have a look at it. I like to say that it is a second generation MOU. It's quite different from the others signed by other countries, even recently, including the EU countries. So this is the contribution we feel we can bring to actually improve the BRI, and will be in this spirit and based on these principles that I mentioned, that our Prime Minister will participate in the second Belt and Road Forum to take place later this month in Beijing, along with several Italian officials, scholars and experts trying to contribute to, as I said, this is I think a key concept, improve the BRI and its rules, its principles. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fedele. Indeed, you mentioned the agreement signed between China and Italy on this initiative is a country-specific one, and I think that is a very interesting way to move forward, maybe with other countries who are open to this initiative, which I understand include probably Germany. Because I understand German Chancellor Angela Merkel says just in March that we as Europeans want to play an active part in the project, and that must lead to a certain reciprocity, she says, and we are still wrangling over that a little bit. So I'm going to open the floor to Mr. Regenbrecht from the German embassy here in Beijing and talk about Germans' questions maybe and concerns about this initiative.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for pronouncing my family name so masterly. Well, which is quite a challenge. So China and the European Union, and within the European Union, Germany, have never been more closely intertwined than today. China is Germany's most important economic partner in Asia, and Germany is China's leading trading partner in Europe. There are currently more than 5,000 German companies operating in China, while more than 900 Chinese companies are active in Germany. When it comes to infrastructure, we all agree there is a great need for infrastructure investments in Eurasia and beyond. Therefore, we welcome any initiative that contributes to sustainable infrastructure development and to the enhancement of regional connectivity. The European Union's connectivity strategy, adopted October of last year, provides a new platform for cooperation and engagement with China to enhance connectivity. Together we should explore synergies between the EU strategy and the Belt and Road Initiative. So, in order to unleash its full potential and to minimize the risks, it is, from our point of view, important that the Belt and Road Initiative is based on international standards and embedded in the international framework, especially in the UN Agenda 2030 and the Paris Climate Agreement. Adherence to international norms on transparency, social, environmental and financial sustainability will be instrumental in the success of the Belt and Road and the building of high-quality infrastructure. On this proviso and this basis, Germany is ready to work with China to build sustainable connectivity and to expand our bilateral success story to third countries. So it would be extremely helpful if China would give more commitment to international standards. To put it concretely, not only make a general reference, but to refer to clear established fora and sets of rules. For example, make a reference to OECD in our negotiations and talks so far. Second, on the structure of Belt and Road. So far, if you look to the structure of Belt and Road, it is hub and spoke, with China at its core and the other countries around. It's quite hierarchical and not very transparent. Third point would be, it would be helpful to address concerns on the creation of parallel structures, what we call institutionalization. So please, no creation of new, of China-centered norms and standards, for example, in the field of taxes, energy, or environment or justice, but please adhere to international established institutions. And my last point would be more inclusive and level playing field negotiations of texts such as memoranda of understandings and leader statements, what would be also highly welcomed. Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Mr. Regenbrecht. Very interesting and concrete points, and I guess very useful proposals as well. I hope these points can be heard by decision makers in China. Ambassador Su, you are next to speak. Having heard all of the inputs from our previous speakers, how do you foresee that the upcoming second Belt and Road Forum for International Collaboration could potentially address some of the key points that have been mentioned here? Transparency, sustainability, international standards and environmental protection, and so on and so forth.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Liu Xin. Before I answer that, let me just briefly give a brief description of how China's reform and opening to the outside world is related to globalization. For China's participation, it can be summarized into four steps. The first one is China's third plenary session of the 11th National CPC National Congress. The second was Deng Xiaoping's inspection to the south, 1992. The third stage was China's accession into the WTO, and the last one is China's, or rather President Xi Jinping's annunciation of the Belt and Road. So the four stages, steps concerned, it seems to me that China, to start with, was a learner, beginner into the international process of globalization. And China's initiatives are basically the reason why, as Liu Xin mentioned at the beginning, has received more international acceptance and support is because that it's a open, it's a process, and it's a equal, and it's a level field of equality, and also the process embodies reciprocity, and or as we put it, a win-win situation. So that being said, I would say that the upcoming second conference of BRI is going to be of larger scale, and in which you can see the participation of more government heads and states. And then there will be, as is mentioned by the Chinese organizers, instead of arousing deeper understanding and of how we are going to proceed, this time you'll be able to see more actions in it. And it's going to involve the discussion of how we can keep into cooperation in the right direction of supporting globalization. And also, since the economy of the world is now suffering from a lack of impetus, the second round of BRI Initiative Conference is going to tap more and new driving forces. And lastly, continually, it would provide a new platform for international cooperation. Just now, and for instance, some speakers in this panel have already mentioned that there have been certain areas in the world you can perceive more support of the process, but in certain areas, let's put it more diplomatically, and more reserve or hesitation. And just now, Ambassador Miller mentioned the concept of status quo. Let me just say a few words about the status quo power. All I would like to say is that if United States, the status quo power, you feel that China's peaceful rise, presented some anxiety on the part of the status quo power. Regarding speaking of the Belt and Road Initiative, it could be taken as a new platform in which the United States and China can cooperate. For instance, let me just ask you a question. Is Caterpillar interested in providing more equipment in the process? Let me ask you another question. Marriott hotel chain, are they interested in setting up more motels along the route? If so, why? And also, if we are eventually build an airfield in that area, for instance, Afghanistan, is the United States company interested in providing with air aviation equipment? So if the answer is not negative, I do hope that there is a good chance for the two governments to sit down and talk about a win-win situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Su. And that concludes the first part of our special program, an ambassadorial roundtable on the Belt and Road Initiative. In our next episode, we'll hear from diverse voices representing developing countries such as Ghana and Cuba, and a leading UN organization who will share different insights about the Belt and Road Initiative. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle @ThePoint_with_LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.